so happy that Jean Arasanayagam is with us now, because she's the real thing. And I think we'll discover that in the next few days. She's going to read some of her poetry to us, and then she's happy to field some questions from you. The occasion can devolve into a more informal context as we proceed. I was thinking that I would read one of her poems that I included in the honorary. There's 3 pieces that I included, Jean's, in this book. And the piece that I'm going to read is one that, actually it reminds me of Salman Rushdie's ability to write about events that have to do with violence and suffering, and yet write about them in a way that doesn't trivialize them, but allows you to understand them and to deal with them. And I think that's a quality of Jean's work too. She does it poetically though, she doesn't do it through magical realism. So it enables you to experience something of the reality that's being referenced in her poetry, the substance of her works. So I'm not going to start lecturing here. It's just all kinds of thoughts are starting to explode, and I say, wow, this is Jean's work. But I thought I would read one of her pieces. It's not very long, so I'm not stealing your thunder.
I'm going to read the shortest one.
I'm going to read Nalur.
Otherwise, you draw all the attention away from me.
Okay, this is entitled Nalur. It's there, beneath the fallen fronds, dry, crackling piles of broken twigs, abandoned wells of brackish water, lonely dunes. It's there. The shadows of long bodies shrunk in death. The leaching sun has drunk their blood, and bloated swells among the piling clouds. It's there, death. Smell it in the air, its odor rank with sun and thickening blood, mingling with fragrance from the frothy toddy pots, mingling like lolling heads from blackened gibbets. It's there. Amid the clangor of the temple bells, the clapping hands, the brassy clash of cymbals, the zing of bullets, cries of death, drowned in the roar of voices calling Skanda by his 1,000 names, Murugan, Kartikeya, Arumugam. We pray, we cry, we clamor, O Sri Kumar. Be not like the God who does not hear, deaf Sandeshwaram. Tirtam, now no longer nectar of the gods, brims over, but is bitter, bitter, and at the entrance to Nalur, the silent guns are trained upon a faceless terror outside. The landscape changes. The temples by the shore are smoking. Ruins, charred, stoned, blackened on empty roads are strewn, the debris of warfare. Stained, discarded dressings, burnt out, abandoned vehicles, a trail of blood, soon mopped up by the thirsty sun. Turned away from bloody skirmishes of humankind, the gods are blinded by the rain of bullets. Six-faced Arumugam, all 12 eyes, close in the darkness. The land is empty now, the pitted limestone invaded by the sea, drowns, vanishes. Waves of rust swell and billow, beating into hollow caves and burial urns, filled with the ash of bodies, cremated by the fire of bullets.
Thank you, John. That about sums up the entire context of what has been happening in my country. I mean, I've gone on from the very beginning, and now I've reached the end, and my poems deal with the aftermath. But John is one person who recognized me as someone who had a very deep and profound commitment to what I was doing. And that has given me a lot of hope and courage. Now, this invitation to Bowdoin has been one of the most focal points of my life. Because each time I travel in a new country, I write, I'm inspired, I have encounters, from the landscape, from the people, from the food, from everything I see. And I thought, what should I offer Bowdoin as a tribute for this invitation? And so I have begun this book, and I will send it to you once it's complete. Lines drawn on water. And it's something I continually see as I look out of the window on the island. Lines drawn on water or waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And yesterday at John's home too, I looked out of the window and there was the forest and lines drawn on water. So it follows me everywhere. But before I begin to read, I'd like to say something about this collection of poetry. It embodies all my inner visions, life experiences, my own as well as those of others, the changing landscapes of the world and its gigantic, indeed colossal upheavals, wars, conflicts, conflagrations, personal relationships and epiphanies have led to the creation of these poems. For me, writing, recording, witnessing, investigating the past and its horrors, man's inhumanity to man, are all grist to the mill. My own country to which I belong and have survived in, experienced both its joys and its vicissitudes, my detours, forays and sorties into other worlds, where I am able to shed the limitations of insularity, racial bias, prejudice, overcome the strangle cords of majoritarianism, and explore my very hybrid identity, are all part of what I have written. This collection, precious and meaningful to me, I dedicate to Bowdoin College. And the catalyst to what activated me to accomplish all this, John Clifford Holt. This literary cornucopia of poems I also dedicate to my daughter Devi, who started out on her own epic journey from Bowdoin, and who, like me, writes and has published her poems in Quill, won a Poetry Award too in Bowdoin, where she won acclaim. Devi was able to inherit the wealth of knowledge and experience of the New World, starting out from Bowdoin, and she has made her own saga journey and achieved and fulfilled her aspirations. Moreover, her relationships with her mentors at Bowdoin College have never waned, together with her friendships. And I have been privileged to be part of so revelatory an experience. Moreover, indirectly too, I have made myself a part of Bowdoin by sharing her experience and have been greatly enriched by personal encounters with John Clifford Holt, and now Padma too, whom I met for the first time, Larry Lushman Singh, Aditya Bell, Amidai Tuwal, and have had perhaps spiritual contact with the great and good like Mr. Eves. So this is a book. I appreciate the great honor of the Bowdoin Award being bestowed on me, and I express my thanks, affection, appreciation, and gratitude to all those who acknowledge me in every way as a woman writer, a peace activist, and one whose deepest commitment has been to the generations of students to whom I imparted unprejudiced and unbiased knowledge. I thank every one of you, academics, students, sponsors, the august administrative staff, and friends who have acknowledged me for what values I stand dedicated to at this point in my destiny. My sojourn, my battling sometimes inimical and hostile forces in crisis and conflict-ridden contexts have indeed brought me the greatest award, which I value so greatly. Thank you all from the very depths of my being. This collection, Lines Drawn on Water, is dedicated to every one of you at Bowdoin College, Brunswick, Maine, USA. Thank you. And now for the piece de resistance, the poem I have written in honor of the Bodhisattva John Holt. And you know he was a Bodhisattva. You know he was. That he has been in my life. Bodhisattva Journey for John Clifford Holt. Listening to John's saga travels through the country of Laos, I see him transformed into one of those spirits that inhabit every part of that land, and with whom generations of the people have lived, sharing earth, water, air. Perhaps those good spirits accompany him too on that long journey in that country, which he also describes, as if speaking of the Puranic epics, as one of the most bombed countries of the world. Yet, undestroyed and indestructible, the spirits still remain everywhere, guardians of the land, guardians of the people, ancestor spirits, spirits that live by the waterways, in trees and forests, in fields, in villages, with their human habitations, in mountains and rock caves, in shrines and temples. Each spirit has a name. The traveler can feel their presence, hear the whisper in his ears of their spirit voices in the sibilance of grass, waving in the waft of wind or leaves soundlessly falling. Water has speech too. Ripple whispers and gurgles, weaving through the air like silk strands, so fine, so invisible to the eyes of a human passerby. There is protection from danger, and yet fear too. But people are still alive, and miracles happen, as in the valley of dry bones. John too is still alive, continues his bodhisattva journey, a guardian spirit that protects our lives. Good spirits never perish through the centuries, through time. And now, with all the lobsters and the clams and everything around me, I wish I could reform myself. And my mind takes me back to a poem I wrote at a conference in Hyderabad. A very interesting paper had been presented by the post-colonial writer and critic Helen Tiffin on nature and imagination. And I was inspired to write this poem, when we were all assembled together and expressing ourselves and our thoughts about the papers that had been presented. I will read just a part of it. You know what Asians are like, Indians are like. After everything is over, we assemble and we talk and talk and talk about everything under the sun, especially about ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions. We talk of beings that nourish us. Animals, plants, Helen says, are symbolically and materially exploited to sustain life. Nature, a reimagined community, is where land, animals, and people have respect for life and for each other. Helen's words are inscribed within my psyche, which becomes a site for change and transformation. Her words read like a poem created out of compassion for nature, subjugated by the power of imperial patriarchies and empires. Animals make us human. We are human in relation to animal. How do we define against animal and animalistic? Primitive people can be annihilated. Animals are subservient but indispensable. Domination is human, patriarchal. Do we make of our lives allegories to conceal the realities within us of power, subjugation? The shadows of our victims pressed into the fibers of the earth, the erosion of wind and water smudging the grain of rock, leaving the lizard and reptile cringing within rifts and crevices to become the fossils of memory. Where then do we find the true self? Our murderous thought and intent hidden, buried deep beneath our fictions. Snails, frogs, plucked off trees, fish trapped, snarled up in tangled nets in waterways, feeding ourselves, engorged on living things, destroying their lives, their procreation, forgetful that salvation lies in their survival. We return to our conversation. This stranger describes a casserole of silkworms. Their squirming ceased, plunged alive into Vesuvian seething cauldrons of heat. The silk strands, unwound, now cocoon my tongue, imprison my utterance. When will my words find release? When will my voice escape extinction? When will I lift my outspread wings to a light on branch inhabited by living things that humans devour, exploiting animals and plants? Can I ever escape that death? Become an unfettered silkworm, transformed into butterfly? A life ephemeral, but briefly free. Seek that garden where man and nature live together without the sacrifice that destroys our only Eden. And then another of my favorite poems, I seem to be reading my apolitical poems, but I think they're very political, aren't they? Yes, it's what I have to be now. All my life, you know, poets are so egoistic and egotistic. You know that. I don't know whether my family feels the same as I feel about myself. I rather subdue my temperament with my two daughters who have two entirely different personalities. One of them is Bowdoin-shaped and molded and formed. Anyway, the poems I've written throughout my career about myself, and now there is a need to change. You change your lexicon, you change your emotions, your mindset, everything. Because yours is not the only universe that you live in, Sri Lanka. Oh no, there's a much wider world, and that world has penetrated into my universe too. I mean, it's commonplace to me to have lived through radical movements. My daughter has, my daughters have. And through ethnic disturbances. My daughter has undergone all those experiences. And, well, being in a refugee camp is a change of the demographic maps in an area of war, conflict and violence and racial bias and majoritarianism. So what does the poet do? Do you go back to the romantic era of poetry? No. This is what I have to tell myself, and this is what I told myself most probably. When was this book published? Probably 2011. The poet, reinvent myself, subvert the old self, that archaic revolutionary of lost causes. Devise a new lexicon shaped from twisted metal, the skeletons of war. The ghosts of time have all fled from the wastelands of devastation. The tanks and weapons blasted, burned. We inherit war and Armageddon. Bunkers, tunnels, mazes lead you nowhere. We are now forever fugitives, anachronisms of an exiled age, antiquities pillaged by anarchy. So you see, sometimes you hear amusing tales about the sightseers who go to the north to view whatever they want to view. And one of the things they do is sightseeing within the bunkers where the people and probably the militants also took refuge. That's a landmark in their lives. They've never seen a bunker before. And they've never had to take refuge in a bunker. And of course, I'm not going to spoil your evening. There are lots of bacchanalian celebrations outside, I know, which you don't enjoy. Well, probably there's time for just one more poem, George?
Sure.
Just one more poem? Which I like to read. I like to read it. There's one outrageous poem. I might read a part of it. This one, body. It just came to me, you know, when I was sitting at my desk and looking out on the crowded street. And the poem came out complete and whole. And I rather enjoy it because it expresses a lot of things about men, women, bodies, war, conflict, everything. The body, impersonal, becomes just a body to be manipulated, detached from the mirror image, the persona you live with, indeed have lived with for years. Here, the body is a text, a piece of discourse to be studied, scrutinized, taken apart, expunged of all its contradictions. The body begins a personal dialogue with itself. The words that pour forth, gushing from that subterranean spring, creates a whole new language for which translation is needed, for the body to have new knowledge of itself, unearth the secrets buried deep within the myth-ridden world that seduced its femininity in that long-lost Eden garden. The skin is a shield, a carapace that protects the vulnerable flesh to escape the slaughter of the sea turtle with the brutal knife blades the seducer wields. The body is a presence, a living, throbbing being that you carry with you all your life. The shadow, an implant that detaches itself from you, surveils you, sightless as it is, and when you sleep, is folded away in your consciousness to be taken out the next day, the creases shaken out and readied for the long march ahead. The body is subject to all vicissitudes, both in war and peace. Execution, imprisonment, arbitrary arrest, rape, murder, caught between crossfires in violent confrontations. But the body is also all things to all men, mother of the cosmic womb that gives birth to galaxies, the procreant creator of humankind. The body, vulnerable, yet holds all the secrets, the mysteries, provides the endless investigation of the mystics, the seers, the prophets. The body is wife, mother, mistress, courtesan, queen, empress, virgin, strumpet, beggar, victim, seductress. Has many names in many tongues. This body of a woman. Thank you. Any questions? I don't guarantee to answer them truthfully. I might fob you off, but you're welcome. Yes, would you come here, please, in case I'm short of hearing.
Okay. When did you begin writing poetry?
When did I begin?
And which language you write?
I always wrote, but I was also an artist, painted. I painted a lot. But I remember when my children were growing up, I wrote lots of poetry. I had no audience. and no one accepted Sri Lankan poetry. There was no Sri Lankan poetry except those who went back to the romantic poetry of England, that brought up in that colonial setup. And I think I really began with the publication of my first book, which was called Kindura. Kindura is a symbol of a single art, half bird, half human. And probably that's how I began to see my dual personality. And there was one important political poem, and that is what John read. That was the beginning. And then, of course, I had to bring up my family and earn and teach and lecture and travel and gather experience. And I must say I would never have been the kind of writer I am unless I had gone out of the insularity of my island. You know, you can get clogged down, reclusive. You either retreat or you advance. Or you say, I'm going to be so private that no one will hear my voice. And that was beginning to happen to me until I came to Bowdoin. So I began in 1973, and my poetry was more imagist and landscape poetry, but it became very strong in 1983 when the program started. That was the beginning of the ethnic crisis in our country, and that was the first time I felt the divisiveness of my identity. Until then, there was no such thought. Being hybrid as I am, of a very mixed ancestry, but I made a very reckless decision to marry into another community which was embroiled in the conflict. And that's how I was drawn into it. In fact, I think I've been labeled as a terrorist once or twice. I don't know. I may still be there to myself. But the fact is, that was the turning point of my life, being in a refugee camp, being set apart from those whom I considered my own kind. We were all Sri Lankans. But now the divisiveness had begun. You see, all the different little communal cliques, and this majority-minority thing surfaced. So my poetry became very strong because voices were very subdued. They did not speak out aloud enough. And being sort of caught midway between different ethnic groups, I felt I could very fearlessly write what I wanted to. And you know, Apocalypse 83, all about the refugee camp and fault lines, drama, and fear meditations in a camp, fiction, all that came about, I don't regret anything that happened. Because I survived. If I hadn't survived, well, there would have been a lot of mourning, because my voice would never have reached others. And in the refugee camp, you know, there was a Balfour Beatty dam being erected, and they sent us a whole lot of crates of things that we distributed among the refugees. Refugees were of all different stratas of society. And there was this child's book, I think religious knowledge book, and I began writing my first poems, my first refugee apocalypse political poems in that book. And it began to grow and grow and grow and grow. But it was not only the ethnic context that I dealt with, because there were the radical movements among the young people, the protest movements, and they're still going on. They have so much to protest. And I must say that what I see of the American students is the openness to knowledge and the outside world, and the privilege you have of the best brains, and I know Bowdoin is one of the most prestigious. When I was in Scotland, I was looking for Aran knits and woolens, and I met an American couple. This was many years ago. And I said, you know, where are you from? They wanted to know, and I told them. And I said, where are you from? They said, we are from the States. And I said, my daughter is there at the moment at Bowdoin. Oh, that's one of the most prestigious seats of learning. I was spellbound. So I feel all of you are so privileged, but that's good for you. Why shouldn't you enjoy the best things that creation gives you. But use it for also the less privileged. Now you're coming to our country, and I know Padma is doing a lot of important things where that is concerned. You're seeing the other side of the coin. But as I have to return to my country, you return to your country. But document, write, witness, and don't be afraid to do so. But Americans are very privileged, I must say, and I'm happy to share that privilege. Anything more?
Well, I asked at the end about language. Do you write in other languages besides English?
This is the only language because, as I said, I was hybrid. And my son-in-law was telling me, you know, most of the sailors who came off the boats during the Dutch period were a pretty rough lot. I don't know whether my ancestors were among them. Some of them were soldiers of fortune, I think, you know, because I have a mix of genes of French, Irish, Dutch, Portuguese, indigenous, everything, and I feel my identity is a sort of Harley Quinn costume, and I'm very happy to be that. I don't want to be pure Aryan or anything like that. It's very restrictive to have that kind of identity, too tight-fitting, too close. So you see, the burghers, as we were called, Dutch burghers, they were very oriented towards Western education, Western culture, and so on. And when we had language changes in the 1950s, you know, after we gained independence, it was the done thing to revert back to your own language. Lots of my ethnic group migrated, not in leaky boats as they do now, not in hazardous sea voyages. They went legitimately, but they had to produce evidence that they had Western blood in them. You know? And they're doing extremely well. They've forgotten their roots and all, but some of them still return. And our first language, as we call it, the burghers call it, is English. But I suppose Sri Lankan English with not RP and British accent and that kind of thing. And I don't know whether my accent was comprehensible to you. Was it? It was. Thank you. So sometimes I have to tell my daughter, she's so Canadianized and Americanized. I don't know whether she understands everything I say or whether I understand everything she says. But I know I've been spoiled terribly. Spoiled for life by my daughter, her husband, Jessie, my mother-in-law. My daughter and I are both privileged, aren't we? Yes. I've already begun writing poetry about Maine. You know, long ago I read Villakeda, the country of the pointed firs. I loved it. And now I understand what it's all about. New England life is unique. So English is my first language, but colloquial. We have colloquial English also, literary English colloquial. As my supervisor said, oh, when you write your thesis, you can't use Sri Lankan English, you know, you have to use British English. And that's what I did. But now it's very, very popular, and I feel it's rather artificial and contrived. Lots of writers try to incorporate Sri Lankan colloquialisms and so on, just to feel accepted. But if you're not sincere about what you're doing, it holds no water. So I am what I am. I incorporate a lot of loan words from the Sinhala. I speak in Sinhala. I study Sinhala in school, and I communicate a lot in Sinhala. My husband, Tamil, he never taught me his language. That's one thing he kept apart from me. But when he went to Boston, long ago, at the university, they had this Tamil faculty, and were they all speaking San Tamil, the highest, purest Tamil. The American students and my husband. So language is a very, very complex thing in my country, especially now because we have what you call international schools springing up like mushrooms, and English is the main subject. But you become deculturalized, I feel. Any of you been to Sri Lanka? He told me he has. He spoke very. You have been too, yeah. Oh my! Really?
20
years ago.
That long ago.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
But I remember.
Ah, we have adopted you. Any other questions? I mean, it's a whole new world for you when you come to Sri Lanka. No? The tuk-tuks and the crowded roads and the volubility and, you know, voices, they talk loud and they talk, over-talk, and you begin talking and I interrupt you very rudely and begin my own conversation. But it's a fascinating world. It's a fascinating world. And it's a world that I would not reject because it has given me so much experience. But our gathering experience, still, thank you, John. Thank you very much.
I
Yes.
do have a question.
Sorry?
He has a question.
Okay.
What do you find the hardest to write about?
What do I find?
The hardest to write about?
The hardest to write about. I find it very easy to write about myself. That much I can. Writing is something that has now become effortless, but I have to be very careful and guarded about the way I write. Now, for example, many years ago, I wrote a story that was based on the life of a friend of mine, in which, you know, you have arranged marriages and proposals in my country. She was forced to marry someone who was not interested in her gender at all. And it was very difficult for her. And I examined the whole idea of being gay. We used another word in the past, homosexuality. But now it's all freedom. It's all freedom. And I rewrote that story. Or I would have been denigrated as an old fuddy-duddy who does not accept the new ideas. And lots of my friends, I mean, my greatest friends, we don't think of gender at all. We think of ourselves as human beings. We can't have those watertight compartments. So it was difficult for me to change, John, my mindset and accept the new attitudes. But now I have no fear about writing about anything. When I first wrote Apocalypse 83, my brother said, don't show that book to anyone, you'll never get your passport. But I think very few people read it, so. I have my passport for 5 years. So re-invite me, I will come. And give me one of those beautiful frame houses overlooking Atlantic. But I won't eat lobsters. Yes, life is hard, but writing makes it easier. And now there's no taboo subject for me. But in the past, I had to change my mindset towards, you know, in the past, where did we, if you had a date and you had a boyfriend, inevitably, you married that person. So for us to accept partnership, we always think of entrepreneurial partnerships and that kind of thing. But partnership, I think that's the most liberating thing that exists today. But not in my time, unfortunately. You know. Yes, Padma.
Hi, Jane. You meet art students like Erika Swan, you know, just briefly. What are your impressions of them?
My impressions. I notice a great change, that there is such open-mindedness, and I think that is a result of their venturing out. If I lived in Maine, I wouldn't think of any other universe. I was in Virginia last year, and I thought anyone who lived in Virginia need not think of any other world. Why think of Afghanistan or Iran or Sri Lanka or Syria or any of Lebanon or Benghazi or anything? No. But the fact is that you have the advantage of going out into different worlds and cultures and exploring them and discovering them. That is something that is wonderful. And when you go with a group, you can share your experiences, and if you're lonely or depressed or unhappy, you share all that. But I think this is a great step forward for American students to go out in groups from universities and colleges and explore everything. The alleyways and the what shall I say, the ghettos and the poverty, the homelessness, displacement, dispossession, dislocation of lives, people still walking barefooted on the streets, people who don't have 3 meals a day. It's something that they need to know, that there's a lot of want in all our countries, a lot of want. And that's going to add extra dimensions to your experience and way of life and thinking. Yeah. As it has done to me. From the third world, I come into the first world. What do you think it does to me? Well, I'm able to go back and survive. And that gives me a kind of armor, that kind of weaponry, survival. But I think it's also because of my genes. I have all my genes. Any other questions? All I say is when you go out, document everything that you witness. Sketch, write, even a line of poetry. It's something you can never recapture. But it will change your lives going out.
Thanks so much, Jean.
Hmm?
Really wonderful. This was very wonderful. Thank you so
good.
much for
Only I couldn't read
sharing
my
your
Bronowski poem to you, unfortunately. You know, I've never read him, but I've read about him. And I said, we are both partners in crime. He was a poet, I am a poet, and it's the taste of honey that keeps us alive.